"Are you deaf, old man?" I said, "Step forward for the scanner." The voice was sharp, laced with the kind of impatient arrogance that only youth and a freshly pressed uniform can bestow. Lieutenant Cade Jennings tapped a polished boot on the pristine concrete, his arms crossed over a chest puffed with unearned authority. Before him stood a man who looked as though he'd wandered in from another era. An old tweed jacket worn soft at the elbows hung loosely on a frame made frail by the long, slow erosion of time. His hair was a wisp of white, his skin a fine parchment of wrinkles, but his eyes were startlingly clear, steady blue. They held the young lieutenant's gaze without fear, without anger, with a patience as deep and ancient as a mountain lake. The old man, Samuel Corbin, held out a simple cream-colored envelope. Inside was a personal invitation to the dedication ceremony of the brand-new Special Operations Combat Training Center at Fort Hadley, and tucked alongside it was a small typewritten note on official letterhead. "It says right here," Samuel said, his voice a low, calm rumble, "that I have a waiver for the electronic screening. Medical reasons." Jennings let out a short, derisive laugh. "A waiver? Sir, this is a Tier 1 military installation, not a public library. Everyone goes through the scanner. No exceptions. It's protocol." He gestured dismissively at the note. "Probably some aide's mistake. Now, are you going to comply or are you going to make this difficult?" A small line of guests, mostly high-ranking officers and decorated veterans, was beginning to form behind them, murmurs rippling through the queue. They saw a young, overzealous officer dressing down an elderly civilian, an uncomfortable but not entirely uncommon sight. Samuel didn't raise his voice. He simply stood his ground, a small, unmovable stone in the path of a rushing stream. "The waiver is not a mistake, Lieutenant. I have internal material from old injuries. The machine isn't good for it." Jennings's lip curled into a smirk as he leaned in, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial mocking tone, louder and more insulting than a shout. "Old injuries, huh? Let me guess. A hip replacement from slipping in the bathtub. A pacemaker. Look, Grandpa, I appreciate you wanting to feel important today, but we have real security concerns. Now for the last time, step through the scanner or I'll be forced to escort you from the premises." The word Grandpa hung in the crisp morning air, sharp and ugly. Samuel's steady gaze didn't waver, but something deep inside him shifted. The crisp snap of the flag overhead, caught by a sudden gust of wind, sounded like a canvas tent ripping in a gale. And the metallic click of Jennings adjusting the holster on his hip was not the sound of modern polymer and steel, but the cold final sound of a bolt being slammed home on a Mosin-Nagant rifle, echoing through a frozen forest of skeletal birch trees. He wasn't at Fort Hadley anymore. He was 21 years old, lying in the snow, the biting Korean wind stealing the breath from his lungs. The world was shades of white and gray, and the only color was the crimson stain spreading from Corporal Jensen's chest, melting a small dark circle in the pristine snow. The click of the bolt had been the last sound Jensen ever heard, etched into Samuel's memory as a permanent scar far deeper than any wound to his flesh. He could feel the phantom weight of his rifle, the stock cold against his cheek, the smell of gun oil and pine needles filling his nostrils, the gnawing emptiness in his stomach that had been his constant companion for weeks. He remembered the faces of the men beside him, boys really, their eyes wide with terror they tried so hard to hide. "Sir, are you even listening to me?" Jennings's voice sliced through the 67-year-old memory, dragging Samuel back to the present. The sun was warm on his face, the trees had green leaves, the war was over for most people. Samuel blinked slowly, the ghost of the frozen wind dissipating. "I'm listening, son," he said, his voice quieter than before. "I'm telling you, I cannot go through that machine." From her post just inside the security checkpoint, Sergeant Eva Rostova watched the exchange with growing unease. She was a career NCO, a woman who had learned to read people with the same precision she used to field her rifle. She saw the lieutenant, a classic butter bar, all spit polish and regulations, high on his own authority, and she saw the old man. He looked like anyone's grandfather, unassuming and gentle. But there was something else there. It was in his posture. He wasn't stooped with weakness, but settled like a mountain that had weathered 1,000 storms. He stood at a modified parade rest, his feet perfectly shoulder-width apart, his hands clasped behind his back. It was a soldier's stance ingrained by years of discipline. In his eyes, they held no fear, only a profound, unshakable calm. Jennings was losing his patience, his face flushing a blotchy red. Publicly defying his authority was an unforgivable sin. That's it. I'm done asking. He took a step forward, his hand reaching for Samuel's arm. You are now a security risk. I am detaining you and removing you from this base. As Jennings's fingers were about to close around the worn tweed of his jacket, Sergeant Rostova noticed something else. The old man's simple, inexpensive watch had slipped down his wrist, just enough to reveal a faint tattoo on the thin skin beneath. It was faded, the ink blurred by decades, but the image was unmistakable to someone who had spent hours studying the history of special warfare units. It was the sigil of a Machvog spike team, a clandestine crossbear reconnaissance unit from the Vietnam era. But this one was different, older. It was a precursor, an archaic design she had only ever seen once in a heavily redacted file about operations during the Korean War, a unit that officially never existed. Her blood ran cold. This wasn't just some old veteran. This was a piece of living history, a ghost. While Jennings postured and threatened, Rostova moved with quiet efficiency. She turned her back to the confrontation, lifted her radio to her mouth, and switched to a command channel. Command, this is Sergeant Rostova at Checkpoint Charlie, she murmured, her voice calm and professional, requesting General Wallace's immediate presence. We have a Code Indigo situation here. Code Indigo was not a real code. It was a discreet signal she and the General's aide had established for situations that were too sensitive or bizarre for official channels. It meant, sir, you need to see this for yourself right now. Jennings's hand made contact with Samuel's arm. The moment his fingers tightened, he felt something he didn't expect. The arm beneath the soft fabric was not frail. It was corded with dense, hard muscle, like aged oak. The old man didn't flinch, didn't resist. He simply looked down at the lieutenant's hand and then back up at his face. I would advise you to let go of me, Lieutenant. The sheer quiet command in those words gave Jennings a moment's pause, but his pride was too far gone. You're in no position to advise me of anything. He started to pull, intending to march Samuel away like a common trespasser. Let him go. The voice that cut through the air was not loud, but it carried the absolute unquestionable weight of supreme command. Every soldier within earshot, including Lieutenant Jennings, froze and snapped to attention as if struck by lightning. A black command vehicle had pulled up silently, its doors opening before it had even fully stopped. General Marcus Wallace, the base commander, a man whose stern visage was familiar from countless official photographs, strode towards them. He was a mountain of a man, his chest a billboard of valorous ribbons, but his eyes were fixed on only one thing, the young lieutenant's hand on the old man's arm. Jennings immediately released Samuel, his hand snapping back to his side in a salute so sharp it was almost comical. General, sir, this individual was refusing to comply with security protocols. Wallace ignored him completely. He walked past the flustered lieutenant as if he were a piece of furniture, his gaze locked on Samuel Corbin. The general's hard, commanding expression melted away, replaced by something Jennings had never seen on his face before, a look of pure, unadulterated awe. He came to a halt 2 feet in front of Samuel, his posture straightening, his back ramrod straight. He took a deep breath and then executed the most profound, respectful salute of his entire 40-year career, "Mr. Corbin," General Wallace said, his voice thick with an emotion that stunned the onlookers into silence. "Sir, we received your RSVP. We honestly weren't sure you'd come. It is an honor to have you here." Samuel gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Marcus," he said, the name a quiet acknowledgement of a long and storied past. "It's been a while." The crowd stared, utterly bewildered. Lieutenant Jennings looked as though the world had just tilted off its axis. He couldn't reconcile the image of the four-star general, a man revered throughout the armed forces, saluting this frail-looking old man and addressing him with such reverence. Wallace held his salute for a moment longer before slowly lowering his hand. He then turned, and the full terrifying force of his command presence descended upon Lieutenant Jennings. His eyes were chips of ice. His voice, when he spoke, was a low, lethal whisper that carried more menace than a full-throated roar. "Lieutenant," he began, "do you have any earthly idea who this is?" Jennings swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. "No, sir, he's a civilian guest, sir." "A civilian guest," Wallace repeated, the words dripping with contempt. He swept his arm out, gesturing not just to the new training facility, but to the entire base, to the flags, to the soldiers standing guard. "This civilian guest is the Rees. Man is a living legend. We are dedicating a building today that is in essence a monument to the lessons he and his team learned, lessons written in blood and sacrifice." Wallace took a step closer to Jennings, forcing the younger man to look him in the eye. "You stand here in your perfect uniform with your polished boots and your rule book, and you dare to disrespect a man who was fighting for this country before your parents were even born. You mock his medical excuse." The general's voice rose, cracking with righteous fury. "You want to see his medical excuse, Lieutenant? You feel you have the right." Before Jennings could answer, Samuel raised a hand, a gesture of quiet pacification. "It's all right, Marcus. The boy was just doing his job." "No," Wallace shot back, his eyes still locked on the terrified lieutenant. "His job is to exercise judgment, not just blind adherence. His job is to show respect. He failed on all counts." He looked back at Samuel. "With your permission, sir." Samuel gave another slow nod. It wasn't for his own sake, but for the sake of the young man who needed to learn a lesson that could never be taught in a classroom. Wallace turned back to the crowd, his voice now booming across the assembly area, drawing everyone in. "All of you listen up. You think you know what a hero looks like? You think it's the guys in the movies? You think it's the athletes on TV? You're wrong. A hero looks like this." He placed a hand gently on Samuel's shoulder. "A hero looks like a man who is quiet, who is humble, who doesn't ask for a damn thing. A man who carries the weight of his service in silence." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. In the winter of 1951, a small six-man reconnaissance team was inserted deep behind enemy lines in North Korea. Their mission was so secret it was denied by their own government. They were ghosts. They were completely on their own. For 3 weeks, they wreaked havoc on enemy supply lines, gathering intelligence that would save thousands of American lives. But they were compromised, betrayed. A full battalion was sent to hunt them down and erase them from existence. The crowd was utterly silent, captivated. The story felt raw, real, a piece of unearthed history. "They were cornered in a mountain pass," Wallace continued, his voice growing heavy with the telling, outnumbered 100 to 1. Their radio was destroyed, their support was gone. One by one, they fell until only 2 were left. The team leader, this man, he squeezed Samuel's shoulder gently, and a young radio operator, a kid from Ohio who was carrying the last of the intelligence. They were both wounded, freezing, and out of ammunition. The team leader made a choice. He gave the kid the last of his rations, his own sidearm, and the one remaining compass. He told him to run, and as the kid escaped over the ridge, this man stayed behind. With a captured machine gun and a handful of grenades, he held off an entire enemy battalion for 2 hours, long enough for the operator to get away. He was captured, of course, spent the next 3 years in a POW camp that the history books don't even mention. He was tortured, starved, but he never broke. He never gave them a single piece of information. Wallace finally turned his gaze back to Lieutenant Jennings, whose face was now ashen, stripped of all color and arrogance. "The internal material he told you about, Lieutenant. That's the shrapnel from 3 enemy grenades that detonated less than 10 feet from him. The pieces of metal they could never safely remove from his chest, his shoulder, and his leg. The medical excuse you so casually dismissed is the price he paid for the very freedom that gives you the privilege of wearing that uniform. The young radio operator he saved, that was my father." A collective gasp went through the crowd. The revelation was a physical shockwave. Jennings looked like he might collapse. His entire world, his understanding of honor and authority, had just been dismantled in front of hundreds of his peers and superiors. He stumbled forward, his eyes filled with a shame so profound it was painful to watch. "Sir, Mr. Corbin, sir, I had no idea. I am so sorry. There is no excuse for my conduct." His words failed him. Samuel looked at the young broken officer. He saw not an enemy, not an arrogant fool, but a boy who had been taught the wrong lessons about strength. He reached out, not with anger, but with a surprising gentleness, and unbuttoned the front of his old tweed jacket. He pulled aside the collar of his simple white shirt. The crowd fell into an even deeper silence. Samuel's chest and left shoulder were a horrifying tapestry of history. The skin was a roadmap of suffering. Old puckered bullet wounds stood out like pale craters. A long jagged scar ran from his collarbone down toward his arm, the mark of a bayonet. And scattered across the landscape of his skin, just beneath the surface, were the faint dark outlines of metallic objects, the shrapnel. Dozens of them. They were a part of him, a constellation of sacrifice he had carried for nearly 7 decades. "They've been with me a long time," Samuel said, his voice devoid of self-pity. "A souvenir from a cold place. They remind me that the most important orders are not the ones that are shouted, but the ones that are whispered in your heart, the ones that tell you to stand your ground when everything tells you to run." He let his shirt fall back into place and rebuttoned his jacket. He then placed his gnarled, steady hand on Lieutenant Jennings's shoulder. The young man flinched, expecting a blow or a reprimand. Instead, the touch was kind. "Son," Samuel said, his clear blue eyes looking directly into Jennings's. "Respect isn't earned by the rank on your collar. It's earned by the quiet integrity of your actions. Arrogance is a shield for fear. Don't be afraid to be humble. Don't be afraid to listen. That's where true strength is found. You'll learn." There was no anger in his voice, no demand for punishment. There was only wisdom offered freely. It was a gift more profound than any medal. General Wallace stepped forward. "Lieutenant Jennings," he ordered, his voice now calm but firm, "you will have the distinct honor of personally escorting Mr. Corbin to his seat. The seat of honor on the main stage next to me. You will not leave his side for the remainder of this ceremony. Is that understood?" "Yes, General," Jennings choked out, his voice thick with unshed tears of shame and gratitude. He turned to Samuel, his back now straight, but for a different reason. The arrogant stiffness was gone, replaced by the rigid posture of a man who had just been entrusted with a sacred duty. "Sir," he said, "if you'll follow me." As Samuel Corbin, the quiet hero, the living ghost, was escorted through the parted crowd, a wave of spontaneous, heartfelt applause erupted. It wasn't for a general or a politician. It was for the old man in the tweed jacket, the man whose humble appearance hid a universe of courage. He walked with a slight limp, a physical reminder of his story, a story now known to a new generation. and beside him walked a young lieutenant, his face a mask of humility, who had just received the most important lesson of his entire military career. We live in a world that judges by the cover, that values the shine on the boot more than the miles walked in it. We so often dismiss the quiet and the old, forgetting that they are the libraries of our history, their wrinkles and scars, the pages of stories we would do well to read. The encounter at Fort Hadley that day was a powerful reminder that heroes don't always wear capes or uniforms. Sometimes they wear old tweed jackets and carry the weight of their valor not on their chests, but deep within their souls. Let us remember to look past the surface, to listen with our hearts, and to honor the silent giants who walk among us. For in their quiet dignity lies the true strength of our nation. Thank you for watching. If this story moved you, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel for more stories that honor our unsung heroes. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And never forget the sacrifices made by the generations who came before.